I'd like to recognize Representative Ocasio-Cortez for her 5 minutes.
Sure, of course. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And apologies again, this overlap with the vote has kind of complicated a lot of our timing here. I wanted to dive in a little bit into a couple of the myths that we see advanced in climate work overall. You know, we've heard a lot of, frankly, fantastical stories about what we would do if we actually commit to saving our planet. We have heard that it is a socialist conspiracy takeover to bring down climate emissions below the IPCC report of 1.5 degrees Celsius. We have heard that it will cause electricity bills to skyrocket and prompt families to pay hundreds of dollars a month in their normal electricity bills. But that doesn't actually compare. You know, while we see these statistics and these studies by Republican and conservative and pro-lobbyist think tanks develop these theoretical ideas of what nightmares could potentially await us if we actually stewarded our future, they fail to acknowledge what's happening right now. Let's take, for example, electricity bills. While there's all this fear mongering about if we switch to solar, if we commit to wind, that our costs will go up a lot, that fails to acknowledge what we just saw in February when Texas had a freeze and their fossil fuel infrastructure was so inadequate and unprepared, thanks to both climate denying politicians who refuse to invest in infrastructure to adapt to our future and acknowledge that we will be experiencing climate events in regions that have never experienced such events before. And also from industry, who doesn't want to invest and actually take the cost of preparing for our future. So what did that yield? It yielded $16,000 electricity bills, oil and gas electricity bills, funded electricity bills from an oil and gas infrastructure on everyday people in the state of Texas. $16,000. That is just the everyday, what we are seeing for everyday people. But then let's also talk about the justice component, because you know we introduced the Green New Deal earlier this week. And one of the topics that I had brought up is how the intersection of justice and the trampling of Native rights and environmental racism actually contributes and is a key element of fossil fuel infrastructure and climate change. I wanted to ask a question of one of our witnesses, Ms. Tara Hushka. We see the Dakota Access Pipeline. We've seen what's happening with Line 3. And it seems as though there's this pattern of fossil fuel industries and fossil fuel pipelines intersecting with native land and treaty land. Is that a coincidence?
I appreciate the question. The reality is that we're the places that are out of sight, out of mind. We are the last places, like I mentioned in my testimony, the last places holding the sacred. When they want to put through a pipeline or through a mine or through some other extractive economy, they don't put that in a rich suburb. They don't put that somewhere that's going to go through other people's land. It goes through ours. Just like what Rashida Tlaib was saying, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib was talking about, when it comes to refinement, it goes in Black and brown communities. From beginning to end, we are the people that are disparately experiencing the impacts of not just the climate crisis, but of the actual building of infrastructure. We're the sacrifice zones.
Yeah, and in fact, in the case of the Dakota Access Pipeline, it was originally supposed to be constructed through a wealthier and whiter neighborhood. And that neighborhood organized and said, not in our backyard, put it over there. And that is what allowed the political, would you say that that's what helped contribute to a political environment where it was easier to look away, where these fossil fuel pipelines were being constructed in communities where it's easier to look away from?
They did their best to try to look away, but then there was a movement that was born by LaDonna Allard and by the youth runners that ran out to DC that woke up the world and had the president being questioned in Laos about the Dakota Access Pipeline. So although they're trying their hardest to look away and to not look upon our faces, the faces of the original peoples of this land, we are pushing back. Every single pipeline infrastructure project that's proposed has indigenous resistance to it. That's the reality of the situation. It's not just us in Line 3, it's Dakota Access Pipeline, it's Mountain Valley Pipeline, it's Save Oak Flat, it's all these different places and spaces of people and faces who are trying their best to protect our lands. These are our sacred lands. We cannot just pick up and leave. These are our homes. We were put here by the federal government. This was the exchange that we made for the country that we're in to exist today. And they're coming for those last pieces. So that's what we're tasked to do. And we have plenty of young people who are standing with us and leading this fight for their future.
Thank you so much.